Hi, and welcome. If you're listening to this at night, I hope it helps you unwind. Please like and subscribe. It means so much to me. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it? It's so nice to think that wherever we are, we're sharing this moment together. In the hush of a long-forgotten valley, where mist curled around the river stones and pine trees whispered to each other on the cliffs above, there lived a small band of early humans. The year, if one could call it that, was something like 25,000 BCE. And their world, though raw and wild, held its own quiet beauty. The cave opened gently onto a narrow slope, its entrance wide but sloping, sheltered beneath an overhang of weathered limestone. Moss clung to the edges, and in springtime, tiny purple flowers peeked from the crevices. At night, the sky above was black velvet scattered with stars, far brighter than any city-born eye would know. There were no artificial lights, only the moon and the occasional flicker of fire. Inside the cave, warmth glowed softly from a hearth ringed with smooth stones. The fire was fed with branches gathered from the forest floor, pine, birch, and dry brush. It crackled in a low rhythm, giving off a gentle orange light that danced along the walls. Shadows of the people moved across the stone, their outlines flickering like spirits in the gloom. They were not many, perhaps a dozen in all, young and old. Their language was made of gesture, breath, and sound. Their clothing was layered with hides and furs, softened by smoke and stitched with sinew. Around the fire they sat cross-legged or leaned against the wall, the elder in the group humming a low, tuneless melody as she rubbed ochre between her fingers. Outside, the wind murmured low in the trees, as if nature itself had decided to speak only in whispers tonight. An owl called softly from a nearby tree. Somewhere far off, a wolf answered the darkness with a single echoing howl. The boy closest to the fire was only 7 winters old. He stared at the glowing embers, watching them shift and fall in slow cascades. His breath fogged the cool air near the cave floor, but the warmth of the fire kissed his cheeks. In his lap lay a smooth stone, and in his hands a small bone tool used to etch simple shapes. He didn't carve symbols yet, only spirals, loops, and the faint curves of animals he had seen in the valley below. The woman next to him stirred a bundle of herbs in a pot balanced on a flat rock near the flame. The scent of pine needles and crushed roots filled the cave. It was a kind of tea, meant to ease sore throats and lull the little ones to sleep. She hummed softly too, her voice blending with the elder's tune like wind through dry grass. No one rushed. There were no clocks, no schedules, no counting of time. Daylight ruled the rhythms of life. Night brought stillness. The people watched the fire, listened to the forest, and let their minds drift with the sparks that rose toward the dark ceiling above. Farther back in the cave, where the firelight didn't reach, cool stone walls were etched with older drawings, lines of horses, bison, and human hands. Some had been made long before this group arrived. The handprints, pressed in ochre and white ash, reminded them that others had come before and would come again. As sleep began to settle on the camp, one of the older boys added another stick to the fire. He did it gently, mindful not to stir too much ash. The flame flared briefly, then settled back into its rhythm. And so the night deepened. The cave exhaled warmth. The wind outside softened. The people lay down, one by one, beneath their furs. No words were needed. The fire would keep watch. And in the ancient silence of the world, they dreamed. The sky lightened slowly over the valley, pale blue pressing gently at the edges of the night. A thin mist still clung to the trees, curling through the forest like breath. Birds began to stir, their songs soft and spaced wide apart, as if they too were waking slowly from dreams. Inside the cave, the fire had settled into a quiet bed of glowing coals. Thin trails of smoke wound upward, vanishing into the upper dark. The air was cool and still. Only the faintest movement, a shifting limb, a stretch beneath fur, hinted that the people were beginning to wake. The first to rise was the elder, her joints stiff from the chill. She sat quietly, wrapped in a hide, listening to the sounds of the morning. Her eyes, sharp despite the years, looked toward the mouth of the cave, where light now painted the floor in a soft golden line. She did not speak. Words were not needed to greet the dawn. Outside, dew clung to leaves and grasses. A stream below the hill gurgled faintly, its waters cold and clear. Beyond it, the forest stretched out in layers of green and grey, the trees thick with pine and spruce. In the distance, the faint shape of a mountain loomed, its slopes touched with snow that had never melted, even in summer. The children woke slowly, blinking at the soft glow. One rubbed his eyes with the back of a furred hand. Another reached for a water skin left by the fire. Their parents rose quietly behind them, stretching and checking the embers. There was no loud speech, no hurry, only the rhythm of limbs and movement, of breath and light. Breakfast was simple: dried berries, crushed nuts, and the remnants of meat preserved from a hunt days before. A little honey had been found in a fallen tree, and now it was shared among the children. Its golden sweetness dripped carefully onto flat stones for licking. The elder smiled as she watched them, her weathered face soft with contentment. One of the hunters stepped outside to scan the tree line. His breath formed faint clouds in the air. He held a flint-tipped spear and wore a necklace of tiny animal teeth, each one a memory of survival. He watched for tracks in the earth, for birds disturbed, for the scent of something unfamiliar on the breeze. The forest was always watching, and so they learned to listen. Inside, the cave walls were warming now, touched by sunlight that reached deeper with each passing moment. The drawings, those faded shapes of ancient animals and hands, seemed to shift in the changing light. A young girl traced them with her fingers, careful not to smudge the dust that had gathered. She asked no questions, but her mind turned slowly, wondering who had painted them and why. Later, some would leave to gather roots and firewood. Others would follow the creek to search for fish. The elder would stay behind, tending to tools and herbs. The cave would never be empty, never cold. It was more than shelter. It was memory, silence, and breath. As the sun climbed higher, the valley softened under its touch. Bees stirred in the undergrowth. Tiny lizards warmed themselves on stones. The world turned, gently and without sound, just as it had for thousands of years. In this quiet age before stories were written down, each day was a page in the long, slow memory of the earth. And this morning, like all others, was folded carefully into the story. The day warmed slowly in the valley, the morning mist lifting like a thin veil. Shafts of sunlight streamed through the branches, dappling the forest floor in flickering patterns of gold and green. Birds chirped in quiet conversation, and now and then a breeze stirred the trees, making the tall pines sway with gentle creaks. From the cave, a group of 3 rose to begin the day's journey to the river. The woman leading them carried a woven sling of bark and grass across her back. It held stone tools, a few scraps of dried food, and lengths of sinew for binding. Beside her walked a tall man with a narrow face, his hair tied back with a strip of hide. He carried a long wooden spear, its point wrapped in resin and flint. Behind them, a child skipped along, no older than 5 summers, her small hands clutching a bundle of feathers she had gathered the day before. They said little as they moved through the trees. There was no need for conversation. The path to the river was known by heart, not marked by signs, but by the shape of the land. The bend in the ridge where a fallen tree had long since grown mossy. The clearing where wildflowers bloomed in summer. The rock that looked like a crouching animal. Each turn in the path was a quiet memory passed down over lifetimes. The forest was alive with sounds, but all of them soft. The crunch of leaves beneath their feet, the gentle rush of wind through the high branches, the rustle of something small, perhaps a rabbit, scurrying through the underbrush. The trio walked with care, feet placed lightly, every step a practiced quiet. Their senses were sharp, always attuned to the living world around them. As they walked, the woman paused now and then to gather things. A cluster of mushrooms beneath a tree root. Strips of bark from a birch trunk peeled gently so the tree would live. A bundle of reeds from a marshy hollow, bound quickly with a twist of vine. The child watched with wide eyes, mimicking the movements, touching the same plants with small, careful fingers. The river revealed itself gradually, its voice rising as they drew near. First only the faint trickle over stone, then the full sound of water rushing between smooth banks, bright and clear under the midday sun. The trees thinned, opening to a wide bend in the river where the current slowed and pools formed near the edge. Here, the group stopped. The man knelt by the water, cupping it in his hands and letting it fall through his fingers. The woman removed her sling and laid it gently on a flat rock. The child ran ahead, laughing softly, chasing the tiny frogs that leapt from stone to stone, her feathers fluttering behind her like a small bird's wings. There was work to do. The woman removed a curved tool made from deer antler and began to cut reeds at their base, placing them neatly into the sling. The man stepped into the water, his bare feet sinking into the cool silt, and began to search for fish. He moved slowly, barely causing a ripple. The river, in its quiet rhythm, had taught him patience. The sun climbed higher. The air shimmered above the rocks, and dragonflies danced over the water. For a while, the child sat beside a clump of moss, shaping the feathers into little bundles tied with grass. She spoke softly to herself, perhaps to the frogs, perhaps to the stones. Her voice, light and musical, mingled with the sound of flowing water. By midday, the man had caught 3 fish, their silver bodies gleaming in the light. The woman had filled her sling with reeds, mushrooms, and strips of bark. The child had gathered more feathers than she could carry. They sat together in the shade of a low tree, eating dried meat and sharing a few berries saved from earlier. There was no sense of hurry. The world moved slowly here, and time was marked not by minutes, but by the movement of clouds, the shadows cast by trees, the curve of the sun across the sky. Rest was part of the journey. When it was time to return, they packed their things with quiet care. The fish were tied with vine and carried in a sling. The reeds bundled again, ready for weaving. The feathers, of course, the child carried herself, pressed close to her chest like a secret treasure. They retraced their steps along the same quiet path, the river's voice fading behind them. The forest welcomed them back with its soft rustles and golden light. Above, birds watched from the canopy, and somewhere far off, the wind shifted through the trees. And still, the cave waited. A a warm hollow in the stone, where fire and family would greet them once more. The cave had grown warm again by the time the sun reached its highest point. Shadows gathered softly near the back wall, and the fire, though now only glowing coals, kept the air comfortable. Smoke rose in thin streams through a small crack near the roof, slipping out into the trees above without sound. In a quiet corner of the cave, away from the sleeping firs and the cooking stones, an older man sat cross-legged on a hide. His hair was streaked with grey, and his hands, though calloused and strong, moved with the delicate care of someone who had repeated the same motions countless times. He was the toolmaker. Before him lay a wide piece of leather, spread carefully to hold his materials. There were bits of antler, smooth stones, flakes of flint, and sinew coiled in neat loops. Beside them rested a handful of tools already made, chisels of bone, awls sharpened to a point, and knives with gleaming edges. The man lifted a piece of flint and examined it in the light. He turned it slowly in his fingers, his eyes half closed, listening to some quiet instinct. Then he selected a larger stone, round and smooth, and began to strike the flint with a steady rhythm. The sound echoed softly through the cave, sharp taps like a bird pecking wood, never rushed, always patient. With each strike, a thin flake of flint fell away, exposing a sharper edge. The toolmaker paused often to feel the shape of the stone, to turn it, to test its weight. He worked as though in meditation, not speaking, not looking up. Around him, the cave went on with its life. Children played near the entrance, their laughter quiet and light. The elder hummed as she ground herbs against stone. Someone stirred a pot over the coals, the scent of fish rising slowly into the air. But the toolmaker's world was small and precise, bounded by the leather mat and the sounds of stone meeting stone. Near his feet lay another project, a spearhead, long and slender, carved from a piece of black obsidian. It gleamed even in the dim light, sharp enough to cut skin at a touch. He had spent 2 days shaping it, his fingers guiding each edge into place. Today, he would bind it to its shaft using sinew and tree resin, creating a weapon strong enough to bring down a deer or defend against a threat, if ever one came. When he finished shaping the flint in his hands, he set it down gently and chose a new piece. This one was paler, more brittle, better for scrapers. He worked in silence, but not in solitude. One of the older boys, maybe 12 winters old, sat nearby, watching with still eyes. The boy did not speak either. He had watched many times before. He knew not to interrupt the rhythm of the work. Now and then, the toolmaker would hand him a flake or a finished tool, letting him feel the weight, the edge, the balance. The boy would nod slowly, his fingers tracing the grooves, committing each detail to memory. This was how learning happened, not through lessons or commands, but through time spent in quiet observation, through shared labor and shared silence. Outside, the sun shifted westward. The trees began to cast longer shadows, and the light that filtered into the cave grew softer, tinged with amber. Still, the toolmaker worked, his fingers moving steadily, shaping the future one stone at a time. At last, he leaned back and examined the day's work. A line of tools rested neatly on the hide, each one a small triumph of thought and patience. Some would be used to scrape hides, others to carve wood or bone. A few would be given to those who had none, passed hand to hand as gifts of skill. The boy beside him reached out to pick up a scraper. The toolmaker nodded once. The boy turned it over in his hands, then smiled, a quiet spark in his eyes. And in the heart of the cave, beneath its ancient ceiling and flickering shadows, another day of work came gently to an end. evening fell softly over the valley. The sun dipped behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the trees. Birds quieted one by one, their songs fading into the hush. A pale glow touched the tops of the pines, then slowly slipped away. Above, the first stars blinked into view, faint and patient, waiting for darkness to deepen. At the mouth of the cave, the hunter took his place for the night watch. He sat on a flat stone, knees drawn up, wrapped in a thick fur cloak. His spear lay across his lap, though his hand rested lightly on it, not in fear, but in calm awareness. The fire behind him glowed with steady light, casting a golden halo that touched the cave walls and flickered into the trees. His eyes moved slowly across the forest edge. He did not expect danger, but the habit of watchfulness was old and necessary. The world was full of sound, wind, animals, trees speaking to one another, but most of it meant no harm. Still, the hunter listened, not just with his ears, but with his whole body. Every breath of wind, every shifting shadow told a story. The stars thickened overhead. They spread across the sky in silent rivers of light, brighter than any fire. The hunter knew them well. He had names for many, some passed down by the elder, others invented during long nights like this. There was the elk's path, the bear's eye, the firestone. He traced them slowly with his gaze, finding comfort in their unchanging patterns. Behind him, the cave was settling into sleep. The last sounds of the evening drifted out. Soft voices, a rustle of furs, the quiet splash of water in a stone bowl. The children had already curled beneath their blankets, their breathing slow and even. The elder was the last to lie down, muttering a low blessing toward the fire before turning to rest. The hunter remained still. He watched as the moon rose over the ridge, a pale silver coin lifting silently into the night. Its light touched the trees and made the grass glow faintly. Insects chirped from the shadows. A fox trotted silently across the clearing, its paws soft as leaves, pausing to look at him before vanishing into the underbrush. He smiled slightly, then looked back at the stars. Each night felt the same, and yet always different. Some nights brought cold winds or the scent of distant smoke. Others were so quiet that even the rustle of a bird's wings seemed loud. This night was calm, still. The kind of night that slipped gently into memory without effort, like a smooth stone into water. From a pouch at his side, he drew out a tiny carved figure, no taller than his finger. It had been made long ago, passed down from his father, worn smooth from years of being held. It was shaped like a bear, with round eyes and a small snout, and its belly was polished from the touch of many hands. He turned it slowly between his fingers, then placed it beside him on the rock. Time passed slowly. That was the way of night. In the distance, an owl called once, then again, its voice echoing softly through the trees. The hunter answered with a low whistle, imitating the call with gentle precision. The owl replied once more, then flew off into the dark, wings brushing the air in silence. The stars wheeled overhead, quiet and steady, and the hunter, wrapped in fur and patience, watched them with calm eyes. Morning returned in hush and gold. The fire, reduced to embers in the night, gave off a gentle warmth. A few faint wisps of smoke still curled into the air, joining the quiet mist that hung outside the cave. The light moved across the ground slowly, touching the stones, the firs, the walls etched with faded drawings. Near the entrance, the women had already begun their morning work. One knelt beside a bundle of reeds gathered from the river the day before, her hands moving with a soft rhythm. She was the weaver, patient and quiet, with long hair bound behind her by a thin strip of leather. Her fingers were strong but graceful, and they moved over the materials with calm certainty. She began by sorting the reeds into neat piles, some thick and green, others thin and golden from the drying sun. She hummed under her breath, a low, circular tune as she arranged them. The hum was not a song with words. It was the kind of sound that passed easily through silence, like wind over long grass. Beside her sat her daughter, still small but old enough to copy the movements with slow care. The child watched closely, sometimes stopping to pick up a reed or to match her mother's pattern. Her hands were clumsier, but the rhythm was beginning to settle in her memory. Over time, the motions would become as natural to her as walking. The weaving was not rushed. Each mat took many hours, sometimes an entire day, sometimes more. The strips were pulled tight, then folded over each other in quiet rows, building into a soft and flexible surface. These mats would line the sleeping areas, offering a little insulation from the cold ground and helping the furs stay in place. A second woman joined them after a time, bringing with her a bundle of cord made from twisted plant fibers. She knelt beside the first and began a new mat, using her own pattern, smaller, tighter, more suited for a child's sleeping place. They did not speak much. Only the occasional gesture or glance passed between them. Birdsong drifted down from the trees. The scent of damp earth, warmed slightly by the rising sun, filled the air. A breeze stirred the edge of the cave, carrying the sounds of the forest in with it. The flick of leaves, the distant chatter of squirrels, the snap of a twig where something stepped lightly. From time to time, one of the children brought over a reed or two, offering it with quiet pride. The weavers accepted each gift with a small nod or a smile. It was how the little ones helped, how they learned. Not by being told, but by being near, by being part of the rhythm. By midday, the cave glowed with light. Shadows moved slowly across the walls, and the mats began to take shape. One had grown wide enough to sleep two children side by side. Another was almost finished, its edges neatly bound with sinew to keep it from fraying. A third lay in the early stages, only a few rows built, its pattern still taking form. Outside, the valley shimmered with summer air. Insects buzzed among the tall grass. Far off, a group of boys played near the creek, their voices echoing faintly through the trees. But here in the quiet of the cave, the world moved with different time. The kind of time that comes from hands repeating the same motion over and over, year after year, without hurry. The daughter, having finished her little mat, no bigger than her arm's length, placed it beside her mother's work. She looked up, uncertain. Her mother smiled, placed her hand gently on the child's head and nodded. The mat was not perfect, but it was good. And it would hold warmth, just as any other. The weaving would continue again tomorrow. But for now, the women rolled the finished mats, stacked the reeds, and let their hands rest. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky, and it was time to turn toward the evening tasks. Inside the cave, the new mats lay ready. Soft, warm, and made from memory and patience. The sun slipped gently behind the distant trees, leaving the valley in a soft hush. Pale golden light lingered in the treetops, and shadows stretched slowly across the ground. Inside the cave, the air had cooled. The fire was lit again, its soft orange glow spreading warmth and comfort through the gathering twilight. This evening, the elder had asked a small group to collect firestones. Rounded, heat-holding rocks used to bank the coals and keep the fire alive through the night. These stones, chosen for their dense weight and smooth surfaces, were found in a dry riverbed to the east. They would need to be gathered before darkness fell. A woman, broad-shouldered and quiet, led the group. 2 older children followed close behind, each carrying a leather sling. The path was not long, but it passed through low underbrush and across uneven ground. The air was fragrant with pine and the fading scent of sun-warmed earth. Birds settled into their roosts above, rustling gently among the branches. The dry riverbed lay beneath a shallow ridge. In wetter seasons, water trickled there, polishing the stones smooth and carrying away the lighter ones. But now, in the dry warmth of summer, it was bare. The stones, scattered like forgotten fruit, gleamed faintly in the lowering light. The woman crouched and ran her fingers over the stones, testing their texture and weight. She showed the children how to choose. Stones that felt dense and cool, stones that made a solid sound when tapped together. Not too large, not too soft. Just the right size to hold the fire's warmth through a long night. The children worked quietly, their voices low and careful. Now and then, one would show a particularly round or smooth stone, and the woman would nod her approval. The slings slowly filled, their contents clinking gently with each movement. Insects buzzed in the brush. A breeze passed over the riverbed, rustling the dry grass and lifting the children's hair. The world around them shifted toward dusk, and the sky began to turn a soft lavender, streaked with faint pink. Overhead, the first bat fluttered out, dipping and twisting in its quiet search for insects. Once their slings were full, they sat on a low stone and rested. The woman passed around a small piece of dried root, bitter but strengthening. They chewed slowly, listening to the wind. The stillness of the valley at this hour always seemed deeper, more settled. The time between light and dark was a sacred hush, neither day nor night. When they returned, the cave welcomed them with warmth and firelight. The stones were placed gently near the hearth, where they would absorb heat and be used to hold it through the sleeping hours. One by one, the older children set each stone in a circle, forming a new boundary around the coals. The elder watched, nodding slowly. Her eyes, though lined with age, missed nothing. She took one of the stones in her hands and placed it directly into the heart of the fire, burying it beneath a layer of embers. The warmth would soak in, and by morning, it would still be warm enough to start the next flame. The fire crackled gently. The scent of smoke and pine filled the air. The children settled near the fire, their work done, their limbs stretched out in the comfort of returning warmth. The woman who had led them pressed her palms together and bowed her head briefly toward the flame. A silent thank you to the stone, the fire, and the fading day. Outside, night had fallen fully. The stars emerged, quiet and bright, over the sleeping valley, and inside, the firestones began to glow, holding the sun's memory in their ancient, silent heat. Deep inside the cave, beyond the reach of the fire's flickering edge, was a quieter space. The stone walls curved in gently, sheltering a place that had been used for many seasons. It was here, where the air was still and cool, that the elder kept her memory stones. The elder had lived many winters. Her hair, once dark as earth, had grown pale and soft. Her hands bore the lines of time, and her eyes, though clouded with age, held the sharpness of thought. She no longer joined the hunts or walked far from the cave, but her presence was a pillar around which the life of the band turned. She remembered things no one else remembered. And each evening, when the fire had settled and the night grown deep, she touched her stones. They were small, each one smoothed by time and oil from many hands. Some were round, others were flat. A few had been etched faintly with patterns, lines, dots, or spirals scratched into the surface with bone or antler. The elder kept them in a woven basket, resting on a piece of fur to prevent their rolling. Tonight, she sat cross-legged beside the basket, her back resting gently against the stone wall. The firelight reached her in flickers, illuminating her profile in amber light. One by one, she removed the stones and laid them in a slow circle on the ground before her. Each stone marked a memory, not words, not dates. Those did not matter here, but feelings, events, the shape of a season, a winter when food had been scarce, a spring when the river had run high and fast, the birth of a child beneath a stormy sky, the loss of a brother in a valley of snow. Each moment was held, not in speech, but in the weight of the stones. As she placed them, she murmured softly, not for others to hear, only for the memory. Her voice rose and fell like wind through trees, a blend of words and song and silence. She did not explain what each stone meant. She did not need to. Those who would inherit the memory would learn by watching, as she had watched her mother and her mother before. A girl, not yet 10 winters old, sat nearby. She kept still, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes never left the elder's hands. She did not speak or ask questions. Her job was to listen, to remember, to understand the rhythm. The elder touched a stone marked with deep lines. Her voice softened. The girl leaned forward just slightly, her breath shallow with focus. She would remember the shape of the stone, the tone of the voice, the slight pause before it was laid down. That was how the memory was passed, not through writing, but through closeness and care. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. A few dry leaves skittered across the stone. Somewhere near the stream, a bird gave one final call before sleep. But within the cave, all was still. The circle of stones grew. Some were older than others, their marks faded, their edges rounded by time. Others were newer, only just added in the past season. The girl could tell the difference. She began to see the pattern. The newer stones always lay closer to the elder's hand. The oldest remained farther away, a ring of stories wrapped in silence. At last, the elder reached the final stone. This one was unlike the rest. It had no markings. It was smooth and dark, almost black, with a surface that caught the firelight in a quiet shimmer. She held it for a long time, both hands wrapped around it, her eyes closed. No words came. Then gently, she placed it at the center of the circle. The girl stared at it, wide-eyed. She knew not to ask, but she felt the moment settle around her like a blanket. This was a memory not yet spoken, a weight not yet shared, but it would be, in time. The elder sighed softly and leaned back. The fire popped once, sending a small spark upward. She looked at the girl and gave a small nod. The girl nodded in return, and the stones remained, glowing faintly in the half-light, holding memories too deep for words, waiting for the next night and the next, when they would be touched again. The morning broke with a quiet change in the air, not colder, not warmer, just different. The wind moved more slowly, and the leaves on the trees barely stirred. Above the valley, clouds gathered in thin veils, long and smooth across the sky. A stillness had come, not silence, but something deeper. The kind of pause that comes before rain. In the cave, the people stirred gently from their mats. The fire was still glowing, banked by the stones gathered days before. Its warmth reached outward in a wide circle, brushing the toes of those still curled in sleep. A woman added a dry branch to the coals, and the flame rose again, shy and golden. Outside, the forest was quiet. The usual chatter of birds had softened. Even the squirrels moved with more care, as if listening. The clouds thickened slowly, brushing against the tops of the hills. Their colour deepened to a soft grey, touched with faint blue. The hunters prepared early, knowing they had only a few hours before the rain came. Their preparations were simple but practiced, checking spear points, tying stones into slings, wrapping their feet in dry leather. They said little, their eyes moving often to the sky. One of the boys had dreamed of thunder. The elder took that seriously. As they departed, their shapes faded into the trees, leaving behind the soft echo of feet on leaf-strewn ground. Their path wound along the ridge, where they could scan the open valley before the sky closed in. Back in the cave, the others turned to tasks best done indoors. A pair of women began shaping a large hide stretched on a wooden frame. They scraped it with sharp stones, removing the last of the flesh, working together in quiet rhythm. The sound was soft and steady, like sand rubbed over stone. A boy sat beside them, tasked with keeping the tools clean. He rinsed them in a shallow bowl, then dried them with dried moss. Occasionally, he looked toward the mouth of the cave, watching the clouds drift lower. His brow was furrowed, but he said nothing. Further back, near the fire, the younger children played with small carved figures, animals made from bone and wood. They arranged them into simple scenes: a deer beside a stream, a bird in a tree, a sleeping bear in a hollow. Their play was quiet and slow, as if the weather had calmed their usual energy. The scent of the air began to change. First faintly, just a coolness, a sharper edge to each breath. Then the smell of wet stone, though the rain had not yet come. The elder sniffed the air and nodded. It would arrive soon. She pulled her fur cloak around her shoulders and walked to the cave entrance. From there, she looked out over the valley. The grass shimmered gently, bent by the low wind. In the distance, the trees began to darken, their leaves touched by mist. She did not speak. Instead, she sat on the wide stone ledge just outside the cave, her legs drawn up beneath her. She reached into her pouch and removed a strip of dried bark. Slowly, she peeled it into thin threads, twisting them into cord with her fingers. Even in the face of the coming rain, her work remained steady. The others began bringing in tools and bundles from outside. Baskets of gathered herbs, hides stretched on racks, bones laid out to dry. One by one they carried them in, placing them neatly within the cave's shelter. The space filled with the smell of earth and smoke and the distant scent of water. At last, the rain arrived. It began with a single drop, then another, falling softly onto the stone outside. Then the sky opened in silence, and a steady rain began to fall. No thunder, no wind, just the even whisper of droplets on leaves, on rocks, on earth. Inside the cave, no one rushed. They sat near the fire, speaking in low tones or not at all. They listened to the rain, to the breathing of the earth. The fire crackled softly, holding back the damp. And outside, the world was washed clean. After the rain, the forest seemed to breathe differently. The leaves dripped gently from their edges. Puddles gathered in the grooves between stones. The ground, dark and rich, held the scent of deep earth. Mist hovered low among the trees, weaving between the trunks like slow-moving smoke. The hunters rose early, though the sky was still wrapped in pale grey. They moved with quiet care, their feet soundless on the softened ground. Water clung to their cloaks. Their tools, spears, slings, and sharpened bone hooks, were wrapped in hide to keep the moisture from dulling the edges. The forest was quieter than usual. The rain had hushed the usual calls and scurrying. Only a few birds sang, short, cautious melodies that echoed faintly in the wet morning. Even the wind moved slower now, barely touching the tips of the pines. They walked single file, their movements light and deliberate. The lead hunter was an older man, lean and calm, with a scar along his cheek that caught the light when he turned his head. He carried no extra tools, only a spear with a dark wooden shaft and a blade bound with sinew. He knew this forest well. The trail was barely visible, but the hunters saw what others could not. A broken stem, a patch of disturbed earth, the faint scent of animal musk carried on the air. They paused often, kneeling to examine the signs. No one spoke. Their breath was slow and measured. They moved toward the grove where deer often came after rain. It was a wide clearing filled with ferns and low grass, bordered by ancient trees. The canopy opened slightly there, allowing the sky to show itself. On dry days, shafts of sunlight would pierce the green. Today, the light was soft and diffused, like a gentle dream. They reached the edge of the grove and waited, crouched low among the bushes. The older hunter raised his hand once, then lowered it. That was all the others needed. They froze in place, becoming part of the forest itself. Time passed without hurry. The grove remained still. A few birds returned, flitting between the trees. A rabbit stepped into the clearing, paused, and then darted back into the brush. Still the hunters waited. Then, at last, the deer arrived. It stepped slowly into view. A young male, slender and alert, his ears turning at every sound. He moved with caution, stopping often to sniff the air. The hunters did not move. They hardly breathed. Another deer followed, then a third. The small group grazed carefully at the edge of the grove, unaware of the watchers in the shadows. The older hunter waited. He did not rush. He chose not the closest, but the strongest. A clean hunt required thought, not speed. When the moment came, it was silent. The spear left his hand in a smooth, practiced arc. The deer stumbled once and fell. The others fled, their white tails flashing briefly before vanishing into the trees. The hunters did not shout or run. They rose quietly and approached the fallen animal with care. The older hunter knelt beside it. He placed his hand gently on its flank, murmuring a soft word of thanks. The others gathered wood for carrying. They worked quickly, but with reverence. Nothing would be wasted. As they moved back through the trees, the mist began to lift. The sun pushed faintly through the clouds, turning the wet leaves silver. Birds began to sing again, a little louder now, as if they had been waiting. Back at the cave, the others were ready. A place had been prepared for the animal, and the elder came forward to offer a small stone from her basket, an old tradition meant to honor the spirit of what had been taken. The stone was placed gently beside the animal's head. Then, without words, the work began. The fire burned warm, the tools were clean, and in the quiet rhythm of their labor, the people gave thanks, not with songs, but with care, with patience, and with deep respect for the life that had passed into theirs. Evening had returned to the cave. The fire had grown tall for a time, its flames licking upward in bright orange curves. But now it settled into a more gentle rhythm, low and steady. The warmth spread in waves across the stone floor, touching the toes and hands of those gathered around. Sparks drifted upward, disappearing into the darkness above like tiny stars. The people had eaten. The work was done. The deer, honoured and cleaned with care, had been portioned and preserved. Smoke from the drying racks drifted through the cave, filling it with a scent that was both sharp and comforting. There was nothing more to do but rest. And so the stories began. Tonight, the storyteller was a man with a long braid of dark hair and a voice like slow water. He sat near the fire, cross-legged, holding a thin branch in his hand. He drew shapes in the ash as he spoke, tracing the same lines again and again. His words were soft and slow, never hurried, rising and falling like the wind outside. The children leaned in closer, their eyes wide. Even the adults, though they had heard this story before, listened with quiet reverence. These were not tales told for amusement. They were memories, echoes of the old world. They carried more than meaning. They carried time itself. He spoke of the first cave far to the north, where the wind never stopped and the ice never left the ground. A cave so large that its ceiling was hidden in darkness, and so deep that the fire took 3 days to warm it. In that cave, the ancestors had painted their stories, not with words but with ochre and ash, with hands and breath. And the animals they painted came to life in dreams. The storyteller's hand moved through the ash, drawing the curve of a bison's back, the sweep of a deer's antlers. He pointed to the wall, where faded drawings still lingered, made by people whose names had long since been forgotten. He told of the time when those paintings were fresh, when the people danced beside them, shadows flickering, voices rising in rhythm with the crackle of fire. The smoke above the flames twisted slowly as he spoke. It curled upward in spirals, carrying the story with it. The people watched the shapes, half dreaming, letting their minds wander through the paths of the old tale. He spoke of a hunter who had followed a red stag across 5 valleys and 7 rivers, who had crossed the ice when it cracked beneath his feet, and who had climbed a mountain so high that the stars had seemed close enough to touch. The hunter did not chase the stag for food, but for a question. And when he caught it, if he caught it, no one remembered. That was not the point. The story ended not with an answer, but with the wind. A few of the children had fallen asleep. One lay with her head on her mother's lap, her thumb still loosely holding a feather from earlier that day. Another curled near the firestones, his breath even and quiet. His face turned toward the storyteller. The man's voice slowed even more now. He spoke of dreams, of the smoke rising to the stars, of the way each person carried the story in their own breath, their own sleep, and how one day they too would become part of the fire's memory. He stopped speaking. The smoke drifted on. The fire crackled softly, one small log collapsing into embers. No one clapped, no one cheered. That was not the way. The story was still living in the air, in the glow, in the hush that followed. The storyteller placed his branch in the fire, letting it catch flame, then set it gently on a stone to burn. He leaned back, his eyes half closed. Around him, the others remained still, watching the fire, feeling the story in their bones. Outside, the night held steady. Stars turned slowly overhead. And in the heart of the cave, beneath the warm breath of smoke, the story rested. In the soft quiet that followed the story, when most of the children had drifted into dreams, and the fire had settled once more into a low and steady glow, the bone carver began his work. He sat farther back in the cave, not too close to the fire, where the light was dimmer and the air cooler. His workspace was a flat stone smoothed by years of use. Around him lay small bundles of bone, some long and thin like reeds, others thick and heavy with the weight of old animals. Each piece had been chosen carefully, selected from the remains of past hunts. Nothing fresh, only what time had hardened. The bone carver was a quiet man. Not elderly, but older than most. His hair was streaked with grey, and he carried a calm that did not waver. He rarely spoke unless asked, but his hands were known. They held memory, patience, the kind of attention that allowed shapes to form where none had existed before. Tonight, his project was small. A piece of deer bone, no longer than a finger, smooth and pale. He held it in one hand and a slender flint blade in the other. His movements were slow, not cautious, confident, but slow enough that each cut mattered. The blade whispered as it passed over the surface. A thin shaving of bone curled away, falling silently to the ground. The carver paused after each stroke, feeling the curve of the piece, tilting it to catch the firelight. He was not just cutting, he was listening, letting the shape emerge bit by bit. Others in the cave had turned to sleep. Furs shifted gently. The fire popped once. Outside, the wind pressed lightly against the stone walls, not in force, but as a reminder. The forest never slept entirely. The carver continued. The design was not yet clear to anyone but him. It might become a figure, an animal perhaps, or a symbol passed down from a dream. Or it might be a tool, a clasp, a button, a bead to hold a cloak closed. These things revealed themselves slowly. Occasionally, he dipped the bone into a small bowl of water, then wiped it dry with a piece of soft hide. This helped him see the grain more clearly. It helped him find the lines that were already waiting within the material. Beside him, a child stirred in her sleep. The faint sound of breathing, slow and even, blended with the rhythm of carving. The bone carver smiled faintly. His own daughter had made such sounds once, long ago. She had grown, taken a mate, made a home farther down the valley. He saw her only with the seasons now, but he remembered. He turned the bone again, and now the curve of a horn began to appear. A bison, perhaps, or a mountain goat. He didn't need to decide yet. The shape would come on its own, as it always did. More shavings fell. He gathered them carefully, not letting any drift into the fire. These tiny scraps would be saved, mixed into binding glue, or scattered near the edges of the camp as part of an old custom. Nothing from the animal was wasted. Every part returned in some way. The firelight reached a little farther now, casting long shadows across the cave floor. The bone in his hand gleamed softly, its surface catching the glow in quiet flashes. He etched a line for the spine, another for the slope of the back. The image was forming now, slowly but clearly. The bone carver paused. He ran a thumb over the surface and nodded to himself. It was not finished, but it had begun, and beginnings, in this world, were sacred. He wrapped the piece in a scrap of fur and set it beside his sleeping mat. The flint blade he wiped clean and tucked into a pouch. Then, without a word, he lay down beside his tools and closed his eyes. The carving would wait until tomorrow. Tonight, the cave was full of breath, warmth, and stillness. And in the dark, the bison in the bone continued to dream. Night deepened slowly, like a blanket being drawn over the valley. Outside, the forest held its breath. The stars shimmered above the trees, undisturbed by clouds or wind. Even the stream, always murmuring, now seemed softer, its song dimmed by the stillness of the hour. Inside the cave, the fire remained, glowing gently in its stone circle. It no longer flared or snapped. It simply breathed, the coals pulsing with a soft orange light. Around it, the sleepers lay curled beneath their mats and furs. Only a few remained awake, those who found sleep elusive or who simply wanted to stay with the warmth a little longer. Among them was a young boy, not yet old enough to hunt, but no longer a child. He sat near the fire, his knees tucked to his chest, watching the shadows on the wall. The shapes danced and shifted as the flames moved. They stretched and curled, turned into long animals, then into birds, then into hands. He didn't speak, he only watched. Beside him sat the old woman, the one with the painted hands. Her skin was lined and soft, her eyes were dim, but her voice, when she spoke, was still clear. She didn't speak often, but tonight she had come to sit near the fire, as she had done in the years before when others were children, and she was strong. "You see them," she said quietly, not turning her head. The boy nodded. He didn't ask which shapes she meant. He knew. "They come when the fire listens," she said. "Not always. Not for everyone. But when the night is right, and the stories are waiting, they come." The boy leaned forward. A long shadow shaped like a bird drifted up the wall and vanished. Another followed, stretching tall before bending into something that looked like a tree. Then a face appeared, not a real one, just the suggestion of a brow, a curve of cheekbone, a wide open eye. Then it disappeared. "Those are the old ones," she said. "Their breath lives in the walls." He looked at her, puzzled. "Their breath?" She nodded slowly. "When they painted, they mixed ochre with spit and ash. They used hollow bones to blow it against the stone. Their breath stayed. It still speaks." The boy stared at the wall. His mind turned slowly, absorbing the thought. Not words, not sounds. Just breathe. Color. Shape. And memory. The woman reached into her pouch and pulled out a tiny bundle wrapped in hide. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a piece of red ochre, worn smooth, like a pebble. She handed it to the boy. He held it in both hands. "That came from the mountain," she whispered. "Far west. I walked there when I was your age. Dug it from under the stone with my fingers. Keep it warm. One day you'll use it." The boy nodded. He pressed it to his chest. The fire shifted again. A new shadow rose, slow and steady. It took the shape of a deer, its legs long, its head bowed. Then the deer faded and became something else. A hand, open still, as if pressing gently against the stone. Others began to stir, not many, just one or two shifting in their sleep or lifting their heads to see the glow. But the boy and the woman remained seated, watching the shapes, listening to the quiet. "I painted once," she said after a long pause. "Not many know that. A spiral near the back wall. I don't remember why. It just came." The boy looked towards the far wall. It was too dark to see, but he imagined the spiral there, turning endlessly. A line with no end, no center, just a slow, patient curve, waiting. The woman leaned back against the wall, her eyes closing. "When you're ready," she said, "the wall will call." The fire sighed. The shadows danced slower now, smaller, softer. The boy wrapped the red stone in hide again and placed it beside him, and the cave settled once more into silence. A silence filled not with emptiness, but with shapes, with breath, with memory that lived on the walls. The morning came without sound. No sharp calls from the trees. No rustle of wind through the pines. Only the low hum of life turning gently beneath the sky. A thin mist curled between the trunks, rising in slow coils from the damp earth. The air was heavy with scent. Wet stone, moss, and the faint sweetness of crushed fern. The hunters had returned with the meat, and for now, there was no need to leave the cave again. But the young girl with the feather bundles had asked to walk, not far. Just to the stone ridge above the stream, where the ferns grew in wide beds beneath the trees. The elder gave a soft nod. The child walked with care, her steps quiet, her hands tucked inside her cloak. She wore a strip of red cord around her wrist, a gift from the weavers. It was meant to bring steadiness. The morning was cool, but not cold, the kind of stillness that didn't need to be broken. Her feet followed a narrow trail, worn over time by many others. A soft line through grass and stone, marked not with symbols, but with presence. A rock here, always passed on the left. A leaning tree whose bark peeled like old skin. A flat stone where someone long ago had once sat. She reached the ridge and paused. Below, the stream curved through the trees, its banks dotted with wet leaves and pale stones. The water moved softly, slipping around roots and over fallen branches. The world here felt held in place, like a memory too precious to disturb. The ferns were thick this season, their fronds uncurled in slow spirals, reaching upward as if waking from sleep. She stepped among them, brushing the tips with her fingers. Their touch was cool and damp, like the skin of a frog. Some were tall, reaching her waist. Others were only just emerging from the soil, still tightly coiled. She knelt near one of the larger clumps and began to gather. Not to take them all, just a few. She chose carefully, picking the ferns whose stalks were firm but not yet brittle. She laid them gently in a small pouch. They would be dried later, pressed between stones to use in tea or for wrapping cuts. The forest gave its gifts slowly and always in small amounts. A path of ash ran near the ridge, faint and broken. It marked an old burn from many seasons past, when a fire had swept through this part of the woods. The trees here were younger, their trunks thinner, their roots close to the surface. She followed the edge of the ash, touching the blackened bark of a nearby tree. It crumbled slightly beneath her fingers, but beneath that layer was smooth new growth. The trail circled back toward the cave. As she walked, she stopped at a wide stone, half buried in the slope. It was covered in lichen now, pale green and soft, but if the light struck it just right, one could still see the carvings, simple lines, circles, and a rough image of a bird with wings outstretched. No one knew who had made it. She sat there for a while, watching the light move across the stone. Clouds drifted above, casting slow-moving shadows across the ground. The sun peeked through in long beams, painting the ferns in soft gold. When she finally rose, she left a feather behind, tucked into a crack in the rock. It was small, pale grey, and fluttered slightly in the breeze. Not a message, not a mark. Just a moment left in silence. She returned by the same path, stepping carefully over roots and through the damp brush. The cave waited, warm and quiet, its mouth half hidden by the mist. As she entered, the others turned to look. She placed the ferns on a flat stone and sat by the fire, her hands still smelling of moss and rain. And outside, the path of ash and fern faded slowly back into the trees. The final night of this quiet season came slowly, as all nights did. There was no sudden change, no rush of colour or wind. Only the fading of light, the soft deepening of shadows, and the long breath of a day coming gently to rest. Inside the cave, the fire was tended with care. A ring of warm stones surrounded the glowing coals, keeping the heat steady and even. The oldest among them sat closest, wrapped in layers of fur, her eyes half closed. her hands resting in her lap. She spoke no words that night. None were needed. The silence was full. The others moved quietly. Mats were unrolled. Cloaks and hides were shaken out. The last of the meat was hung to smoke. The final cups of hot water with crushed bark and dry herbs were passed from hand to hand. The scent of pine and ash lingered in the air. A child, still rubbing her eyes from a late nap, was helped into her sleeping mat by her brother. He tucked the furs gently around her shoulders, then lay beside her. A soft hum rose near the fire, low and slow, carried by one of the weavers. It wasn't a song in any language, just sound. The kind that wraps the edges of thought, softens the breath, and settles the bones. Outside, the wind moved among the trees in long, sweeping sighs. An owl called once, far off. Then again, closer. The stars brightened above the valley, and the moon rose behind the ridge, not full, but bright enough to touch the tops of the trees with silver. One by one, the people lay down, the hunters with their cloaks drawn tight, the toolmaker with a pouch of stone flakes beside his head, the storyteller with his hands folded under his cheek, even the girl with the feathers, now bundled in furs, holding her last bundle close to her chest like a charm. The fire dipped lower. The cave darkened. The stone walls, marked by drawings and smoke, watched in silence as sleep crept in, soft as snow. And still, the memory stones lay in their circle. The elder had placed a new one that evening, a simple, unmarked piece, warmed in her hands before being set among the others. Its meaning was not spoken, but the young girl who had watched her place it would remember. The smoke curled slowly toward the high crack in the cave ceiling. It moved like a spirit, unseen but felt, carrying warmth and scent upward, out into the starlit night. The world was still. The people slept. Their dreams wandered through rivers and trees, through old songs and fires long burned. They drifted through the painted shapes on the wall, through the hands that had pressed ochre to stone, through the silent rhythm of breath passed from one generation to the next. And the cave, older than any name, held them all, held their warmth, their stillness, their sleep. Thanks for watching this far. I truly appreciate you more than you know. If you like this story, please like and subscribe.